A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. And the more eagle-eyed amongst you might see a suggestion, a whisper of fatigue. Well, I have just come off the golf course for the first time in 10.5 months. So there is cause for celebration. Today is the first round of the Dimension Data Pro-Am at Fancourt. And after managing to ignominiously snap my Achilles in April of last year and being out of all sorts of sports since then, today was the first round of golf back. The golf wasn't exceptional, but the experience was a lot of fun. And most importantly, getting in an entire round of golf was a small triumph. And that was cause to raise a glass of bubbles, which I did, and which I will be doing again very shortly when we celebrate somebody very special in the South African wine industry who very sadly left us just a little while ago. But today we pay tribute to the great Dave Hughes with a good friend of his. Fiona McDonald will be joining us on the show in just a moment to look back at a remarkable life in wine and the incredible impact that Dave had on the South African wine industry. So that is to come. And then a little later on in the show, Nina Marie Bruel will be joining me. She is with Boschendal, a winemaker, a wine master, and somebody who has got her own very rich life in wine to share with us, as well as a couple of bottles from a brand that is on the up and up and up. But can you be a big, strong commercial wine and still retain that kind of niche integrity that so many wine lovers love? Well, I think you can, but I'll see what Nina Marie has to say. She'll be joining us a little later on. So Nina Marie later, Fiona in just a moment. First of all, though, here's some recent wine news. Well, this is coming up if you happen to be down in Cape Town. Christian Eads, a regular on the show, and Dave Clark, you'll also have seen on the show in the past. Dave from Ex Animo, who look after a whole pile of really cool South African wine brands. And they will be at the Wine Library Culture Wine Bar in Cape Town as they deliver the Wine State of the Nation address. Christian Eads summing up where South African wine is and where it might be going. I suspect there'll be some similar themes to those he spoke of during the course of our opening show of 2023, when he looked ahead to what he felt would be big on the wine agenda. Either way, I think it's going to be a really good night. If you would like to go along, there it is, 16 February, 7 o'clock. Head over to Culture's website and join David Clark and Christian Eads for the State of the Nation of South African wine. Now, this is coming up if you're in Johannesburg, something for you on the 14th of February. It is Valentine's Day. It is a 4-course meal. It is wine pairing, and it is on Valentine's Day. And this is a restaurant that is featuring in the press quite a lot at the moment. Chef Ransley Peterson doing a terrific job with the food there, and Rowan is sommelier pairing things up for you next week. So if you only just remembered it Valentine's Day and you desperately need to find somewhere, there are a few spots open, and that is at Royal Johannesburg Golf Club just off Linksfield. And then coming up next weekend, I will be down in Cape Town hosting and auctioneering at the Cape Wine Auction. A decade. I cannot believe it is 10 years already since the Cape Wine Auction kicked off. It's been incredibly successful, well over 100 million rand raised during the course of its lifespan so far. And I can tell you that it is going to be a night that features some incredible lots. In fact, just a quick look at some of them. There is a Jan Hamzachat and Sibani Lodge experience, where you get to head to the Overberg and to the Cradle of Humankind. 30 people on a Constantia wine routes experience. There's the chance for a classic car weekend tour with Rickety Bridge. There is a luxury weekend at Harsendal for 10 people. You also get to head out to there are a couple of actually some quite distant ones. There's a trip that will take you out to an island off the coast of Madagascar. And there is also the opportunity to head up to Singita with Paul Kluver and Airlink. And those are just some of the trips. There's also some Element House stays, and it promises to be a really, really great evening. Lots of fun. Last few tickets are available. Ian Banner will be joining me for that. And in fact, Ian will be joining me on Monday night on the show, together with Paul Kluver, with Raymond Ndlovu, who serves his last auction as chair of the Cape Wine Auction Trust. Ken Kinsey Quick will be on the show as well. We'll be looking ahead to next weekend at Harsnell. Last few tickets available if you do want to come along. Now, one of the themes, I'm sure, in conversation on that evening, as there have been over the last couple of days throughout the winelands and surrounds, the life and times of Dave Hughes. Dave sadly left us a little while ago, but he left behind an extraordinary wine legacy. And in a second, Fiona McDonald will be joining us to find out just why this remarkable man was so important to South African wine. But before that, here's just a quick look at one or two shots of a really special member of the South African wine family. Dave Hughes, a wine writer, a wine judge, a wine collector, but I don't think any of those terms quite sum up what a wide-ranging impact on and love for wine Dave Hughes had. So let's speak to somebody who should be able to do that job particularly well. And say a very warm welcome to Fiona McDonald. Fiona, lovely to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's good to be here. And yeah, it was quite moving seeing all those pictures of Dave, and brought the memories flooding back.
Of which there are many, and we're going to ask you to share some of those in just a moment. But let's start with Dave and who he was. For those of us who've been in the industry for a while, we certainly know him, we know his impact. But for perhaps some of our younger viewers or people a little further afield, they might not have known Dave so well. Give us the snapshot of who Dave Hughes was and why he was so important to South African wine.
Well, Dave was kind of more than just a wine man. He actually started out as a distiller with African distillers in what was then Rhodesia, and came down to South Africa and worked at Germiston or Wadeville, I think it was, for Stellenbosch Farmers Winery at the time, in production. He also had a stint in KwaZulu-Natal, from what I recall, and then was brought down to the Cape by Ronnie Melk, who was the head of Stellenbosch Farmers Winery at the time. He had stints abroad in Scotland. He actually lived in Scotland when he was doing his distilling training, and he was just an amazing person. One of his responsibilities, or he felt a huge need to improve education about wine. He said there's more than to the wine industry than just selling wine to consumers, but you need to educate your consumers so that they know what it is that they are consuming. So he was a prime mover behind the establishment of the Cape Wine Academy, which has been going for 30, if not more years. In fact, it's probably 40 or 50 years now. He, in consultation with some of his staff at the time when he was at Nederburg, SFW, he started the Nederburg auction in 1975. And interesting anecdote, I once asked him, before they built a permanent venue for the Nederburg auction, it used to be a mobile thing. I used to put up a marquee. They would have satellite kitchens. I mean, at one point, I think there was something like 1,500 guests who were invited, and it was very, very exclusive. It was trade only. You couldn't go as a member of the public. So it was hotels and guest houses and F&B managers from all the in the days of the Joburg Sun and the Carlton Hotel and the Royal in Durban. If you cracked the nod to the Nederburg auction, you knew you'd made it. But I once asked him about the logistics of setting something like that up, and in typical Dave fashion, he said it was all based on setting up a circus. Now, his father was an interesting guy who used to work for a circus at one point. And, a circus, when it came to town in the old days, when you did have circuses moving around all the plattelandse dorpies, used to have to put up a big tent and all the seating and everything else, and then pack it all up and move it on to the next town the next day. So they were organized, and that's the sort of the master plan for setting up the Nederburg auction. But I digressed, as I so often do. Dave set up Cape Wine Academy. He was the chairman of the International Wine and Spirits competition for something like 30 years, doing both wine and spirits. And I know the messages we've been receiving from the UK from people who have judged with him and who have benefited from his expertise across a range of spirits. It wasn't just whiskey; it was whiskey and rum and gin and brandy and vodkas and liqueurs and all sorts of things. He just had this unbelievable knowledge. But despite all that, he was just the most kind, gentle, giving, generous man. He couldn't say, he was constitutionally unable to say no to anyone. If you phoned him up with a query, he'd drop what he was doing and go through it. And that's also another one of the messages that has come through, that is that so many people have said he was so generous with his time and his knowledge in helping them, and that was his mantra, was to education, but not in a preachy way. He always did everything so gently.
It's been extremely hard. In fact, I'd say it's been impossible to find anybody who's had anything but really good words to say about Dave, and then that's coming through already with you this evening. And that element of sharing the knowledge that he had and doing it so happily, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people, and probably yourself included, who will look back on the time they've spent with Dave as being quite formative in how their wine careers have developed and flourished.
Absolutely, and not necessarily, as I said, in any formal way. Yes, the Cape Wine Academy assisted in the formal acquisition of knowledge, certainly on my part, but it was in the informal stuff, in sitting around a table with Dave. He just dropped these little bombs of knowledge. John Matham, I seem to recall, was at a lunch once at the Hughes' place in Devon Valley with 15 dogs running around outside, because Lorna was a keen animal rescuer, and Dave loved dogs as well. He used to love, and when he was fitter and more vigorous, he used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do his exercises, do his Catholic devotions, his prayers and his readings, and then he'd set off with a run with 5 or 6 of the dogs and run up to the top of the hill overlooking Simonsig at the back of the Devon Valley. And then he'd come back and start his day, invariably recording a little message. It's a lovely start to the day in the Devon Valley, and it's going to be a high of 28 degrees. And it's a very happy birthday to whoever's birthday it was on that particular day. And he was known for his answering machine messages for so many years. But John Matham and I were there for lunch once, and I, at the time, was editing Whiskey Magazine, and I'd just done a story about the discovery of these bottles of whiskey and brandy that had been frozen in ice in Shackleton's expedition hut. And the New Zealand Arctic expedition, who were responsible for the maintenance of that hut, had taken a case of the whiskey away and a case of the brandy away, and they had carefully thought it out. And Richard North Patterson, who was the distiller of White and Mackay in Scotland, had been flown over from the UK to go and fetch a few bottles, take them back to Scotland, and then taste them and analyze them and try and replicate that whiskey. And it's now a whiskey that is actually on the market. It's called Shackleton's. So I'm telling the story at lunch, and Dave just quietly gets up and tootles through to his office, and he comes back with this very nondescript little, it was like a water bottle, like a Volpre water bottle glass. And he gets a glass out of the cabinet and he pours a wee dram of this brown spirit into our glasses. And then he looks at me and he just raises his eyebrow and he nods. And I said to him, "And this?" And he said, "That's the whiskey." He said, "You're not allowed to tell." He's dead now, so I can tell the story. But he said, "You're not allowed to tell anyone about this." He said, because Richard North Patterson could get into big trouble for letting me have some of this, because they hadn't even taken the cork out of the whiskey bottle. They had actually syringed these incredibly precious liquid out of the bottle, and they were using it for analysis and samples. And he'd bumped into Richard North Patterson at the judging of the International Wine and Spirits competition in Dunsfold in the UK, and Richard had given him a little sample, so like 200 mils or something. So the stuff was incredibly precious, and the history attached to that this was a spirit that Ernest Shackleton, the Shackleton, the great explorer who got all his men home, this was something that he would have thought about and packed for his expedition, which was so ill-fated, and to be drinking history. That was the kind of thing Dave did. He just did it so modestly and just blew my mind to be lucky enough to experience something like that.
You also had what sounded like a seminal experience, an adventure. One my aunt has been on, and she's regaled me with many tales of that particular trip. And that was the Camino. You did that with her, didn't you?
Yeah, we did that in 2004, and a lot of the pictures that you saw in that little opening montage were taken in quiet moments on the Camino. So we did that in, as I said, in 2004, in May and June. Unfortunately, Dave developed sciatica from the way that he was hoiking his pack onto his back, and he had to call it quits about 2 weeks before the end of the walk. So Lorna and I carried on walking, and in typical fashion, he the dogged, determined guy who then finished 10 or umpteen Two Oceans marathons and Comrades marathons. He wanted to go back and complete it because he was a devout Catholic, and his faith was very important to him through all the years. And he went back the following year on his own and did the last about 250 Ks that he had missed out on. And I think he and Lorna went back twice subsequently, and they carried on. They did the Portuguese route. So he was a very enthusiastic walker. I mean, I walked the Whale Trail with him and Phil and Zelma Long, Phil Fries and Zelma Long, ex Villafonte owners. Norma Ratcliffe was on the same trip. He did a lot of walks in the UK because he used to spend about 2-3 months in the UK when he was judging at the IWSC, and he'd utilize his time off to go and walk the coastal path in Devon or Cornwall or Hadrian's Wall or hikes in Scotland. He loved Scotland.
He also loved very clearly the art of writing. He gave many of us an enormous amount of joy reading his thoughts on wine, and they were often on so much more than just wine. But he did so prolifically. I think there were more than a dozen books that Dave put out over the course of his career, leaving us with a remarkable legacy, but also with a very clear showing that putting pen to paper and sharing his thoughts and his wine wisdom was something that meant a huge amount to him.
Dave loved books. He loved books and he loved reading. And his office in Devon Valley, one entire wall was literally from floor to ceiling and probably about 7 or 8 meters long, was just these books about everything. Wine, whiskey, spirits, rum, interesting people. Dave got me hooked on clouds. I will look up in the sky and I'll go, oh my gosh, that's a lenticular cloud that's indicative of high wind speeds, and it's because Dave and I were chatting one day about an unusual cloud that I saw, and yeah, that's a XYZ, and he knew, and he went to his little library and he hauled out 2 or 3 books on clouds. He was just a fascinating man who was curious and loved to then go into things and try and learn more, just out of sheer interest, curiosity.
We're not in a position to ask him this question himself, sadly. So I'll ask you instead, Fiona. What do you think Dave, who was, I think, amongst many other qualities, a very humble person, what would he like to think, even if he wouldn't put it in quite so many words, his legacy would be as he says goodbye and leaves these remarkable wine stories behind?
It's actually a difficult question to answer. I think, the pat answer would be certainly the education that is the thousands of people who've gone through the Cape Wine Academy as a result of it having been set up all those years ago. But I think he genuinely touched people's lives. He was so generous, and in such a modest way. So many winemakers I know would go to Dave for advice. He moved in wine circles, and yes, he was friendly with the Giles and the Neil Ellises and the Jan Boelen Coetzee and so forth. But I mean, I remember 10 or no, it must be more than that, but like 14 years ago, going to Stellenrust to watch rugby, of all things. Tertius and Kirby had invited us to watch, I think it was the opening game of the World Cup so it must have been 2003. That's when it was. And was 2003 a World Cup year? I can't even remember. Anyway, it was thereabouts.
It was indeed.
And we went to watch the rugby, and Tertius had organized this huge big screen in their lounge, and in between he kind of said he was in awe of Dave. Dave had this aura. Everybody knew who Dave was with his white bushy beard. But Tertius was this young guy who had no formal qualifications as a winemaker. He had studied dentistry, and he had he'd learned how to make wine essentially from Mike Dobrovic. But he's a smart guy, and he knew his chemistry well. And he asked Dave to come into what was then their winery. It was literally a converted house, and he had this one barrel of Chenin that he paid a lot of money, which was big money for them in those days, to buy this new barrel. And he'd made this barrel of Chenin, and Dave tasted it, got the wine thief out, and they tasted it. And Dave was just so caring and so kind in his analysis of that wine. And he said to Tertius, "Listen, you've got nothing to worry about. This is a seriously good wine, and you should be proud of it." And that is the wine that then went on. It was the first one. It was the Stellenrust 43, which is now, I think they're on to the 57 or something like that. And it's the Stellenrust flagship. And Stellenrust as a producer has gone on to do so much and be so successful internationally, both as a wine brand and as a business, as a very successful business. And they've subsequently gone on to build this amazing, bells and whistles cellar. But Tertius remembers Dave incredibly fondly. I think that's the thing. He touched people's lives in a very humble, modest way. Well, a significant way, but very modestly.
The memories he leaves are innumerable, and we could chat about him for hours and hours and hours. I think one of the memories, though, that speaks to the playful and fun nature of somebody who gave so much was a story you mentioned to me when we were talking a little earlier on today. And this was a man who managed to, in a time of great need, Fiona, come up with a rather novel way of dealing with a bottle of Cup Classique that was refusing to open.
Yeah, Dave was nothing if not a problem solver. We were doing the whale trail, and Zelma Long of Villefonte had been given a bottle of De Wetshoff Cap Classique, and it had an incredibly recalcitrant cork. And despite all of us giving it our best shot of trying to prise it open with our thumbs and twisting it and tugging it, I mean, it got so bad that honestly I have a photograph of Zelma with this bottle of wine in her teeth, like trying to get this cork, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And Dave kind of just shook his head and picked up the axe that was sitting there from when we'd been chopping the kindling for the briar fire. And he just took this axe and whoop, one shot, no problem. Cork out, pour the bubbles. Cheers.
A man to have around in a time of need. Fiona, before I let you go and say thank you for sharing a little on the story of such a remarkable person, as we raise a glass, I'm going to be doing so in just a moment with some bubbles from Boschendal. What do you think Dave would be recommending we drink at this particular moment?
Anything. Dave, if there's one thing, Dave was not a snob. He loved Nederburg. He had an amazing, smart guy. He bought that Nederburg 1974 cab. He had cases and cases and cases of it, and he kicked himself years later because he didn't know what he'd done with it. He moved so frequently that his wine didn't always, the full complement of wine didn't necessarily always move with him. He used to store it. I know at one point he had some wine stored at Valera and he had wine stored elsewhere, and it was stored in good conditions. He wasn't a snob. Dave loved a little rum and tonic of an evening. He would love a beer after a wine tasting. Really enjoyed his gin and tonic. So Dave's advice would be there's no such, there's no, what is his saying? There's no excuse for drinking bad wine or something like that. But he would say, whatever you're drinking, be it spirits or wine, just enjoy it and enjoy the occasion and revel in the moment while you still have it.
Fiona, some sage words, but also just a really personal, intimate recollection of a wonderful man. I'm sorry I didn't get to know him better, but I felt like I knew him. I used to read The Tavern of the Seas on a regular basis, and I read a number of his books, and just a great character, great contributor, and a great part of our South African wine family. So thank you for sharing the memories. And we're certainly raising a few glasses here. I know you'll be doing so as well. Thank you for that. And if I think back, I think the first time I first annoyed you was when I was trying to persuade you to let me write something about Argentina and some misadventures over in Mendoza around Melbeck. And that was a big part of my early wine journey. So hopefully there'll be some more to come, and we look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Anytime.
There we go. Fiona, thank you very much. Fiona McDonald, former editor of Wine Magazine, wine expert at large. And in the context of today's show, a dear friend of the great Dave Hughes, sadly with us no longer in person, but most certainly with us forevermore in terms of the literature he left behind, the memories he left behind, and the extraordinary impact he had on South African wine. And in fact, my next guest actually knows Dave Hughes. Is there anybody who didn't in the South African wine industry? So I'm going to ask her, she spent a very busy day tasting vast amounts of wine and has now taken some time off. So Nina, if you want to come and join me, we are live from Fancourt. And here we go. If you know the wine industry, Nina Marie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
To see you.
Yes.
Cheers. And before we start talking about your remarkable career and the world of Boschendal, Dave Hughes, it's desperately sad, but he did live a long, rich and full life, and he impacted on just about everybody in the South African wine industry over the last few generations.
No, definitely. As coming into the Cape Wine Academy and the Cape Wine Masters, I'm still a youngster, and he was always there at all our events, and it was just amazing to learn from him. And he was, always keen to talk to anyone, and he just passed on his knowledge that he had, and always just so fun to be with. So it was absolutely an honor for me to have been able to spend time with him, and it was an honor.
Well, we're raising a glass to Dave today, and cheers to his memory. But cheers also to you for joining us and for coming through. Boschendal is the official wine partner of the Dimension Data Pro-Am, and based on last night's opening night, a very popular partner of the Dimension Data Pro-Am. We've got some of the wine to taste and to talk about, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But also want to chat a little bit about you, because you've got this multifaceted career where there's not much in the wine industry you haven't done so far, and everything you have done, you've done with a great degree of accomplishment and success and enjoyment. How did the journey into wine begin for you?
I actually grew up in Pretoria, Dan, and when I had to decide what to go study, I just didn't want to do the normal things. So no one in Pretoria had ever heard of viticulture and enology.
It's not big as a wine growing and producing area.
No, and I was looking for something that was exciting. I wasn't looking for something that was boring. My dad wanted me to become a doctor, same as him, and I was just a little bit of a rebelling teenager who didn't want to do what my dad did. But luckily, he was wine was his second love. So he was when I told him one day, okay, I think this sounds exciting. Let me go do this. He was like, okay, you're allowed to go do that. And I just I spoke to someone in the wine industry at that stage, and there were a few women then, and I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. Let's go do it. And then your first year at varsity, it's still very much a BSc degree, so it's quite boring. And then the second year, when the winemaking subject started, I just fell in love with it. And from there, I just absolutely, I love working with wine. Not making wine anymore, but I'm still working with wine on a daily basis, which is, for me, amazing.
We'll move on to why you're not making wine anymore in a moment. But what was that like when you produced your first wine and you could say, hey, this glass, this is me. I'm responsible for this.
That's the thing. I'm also my own worst critic. So I always said I wanted to sit on my stoop and drink my own wine and actually be happy with it. And the day I did that, it is so gratifying, and it is pretty amazing to make your own wine. But it's also you're putting yourself in a bottle. So every time you do that, it's like you're giving it to someone else, and it's like, okay, you're judging me. So it is, for me, every time it was bottling day, it was quite nerve-wracking. I don't know if it ever gets better for the winemakers out there, but for me, it was also always bottling day to get everything perfect, making sure you made the right choices everywhere. And but yeah, it's fun as well. It's quite amazing to have that part of you in a bottle and show someone, this is what I believe is a good wine. So
yeah, it's exceptional. It's something not many people get to do. But as you said, it's not without its stress. It's not without its challenges. Was that part of the reason why you decided that the move into the space you're in now was what you wanted to do?
No, not quite. So I had a bit of I went through a divorce. So kind of changed my career completely. And the HR came back to me and said, no, you know what, we've already found someone, but don't you want to, this job, don't you want to do marketing for Boschendal? I was like, no, I'm a winemaker, it's my passion. But you know what, this stage of my life, I'm open to, I'll hear what they have to say. And you know what, that door just flung open, and all the arrows said, you're going through this door, and I'm loving it. I've been with Boschendal now, I think, a year and 2 months. And I've learned a whole new skill set. So when I made my own wines, I basically did the marketing for it. I did everything, but it was on a much smaller scale. Now with Boschendal, we export to 70 different countries. It's, I'm working with so vast different key players, and it's really interesting. I'm learning every day. It's keeping me on my toes. And we've got an amazing team that we're working with. So I still work closely with the winemakers, and I think I speak winemaker. So the gap between marketing and winemaking is just, I think, better now, because... And
that is a real language. People might think that's a bit of a joke, but winemakers do speak a particular, if not entire language, and it's definitely a dialect.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm really enjoying it in Boschendal, and I think there's so much potential, even as the category of South African wine globally, building Cap Classique in our big markets of the UK and USA. It's very exciting. I'm really enjoying it.
It's also, for me, part of a challenge, and I'll just make sure we've got everybody nicely on screen there. It's a challenge that I remember, I think it was Richard Rushton speaking about years ago on a platform, about how something South Africa really needs is kind of a Penfolds equivalent, where we've got a really big brand, but a brand that is still maintaining quality, that gives us a benchmark. And it's a difficult one, because in the eyes of particularly the wine snob, once a wine gets a certain volume, a certain brand, once it becomes fairly ubiquitous in the market, people tend to shy away from it. No, we want that niche. It has to be made by a bearded winemaker from the Swartland who doesn't wear shoes and is made in 7th fill Romanian barrels. And that's the kind of approach. How challenging is it to maintain, knowing that you've got the quality, certainly, but maintaining the eyes of the consumer, this is still a brand that sits in that high end, even though we're making so much more wine than many of the other brands that play in a similar space?
Well, I think if you look at the models of those big brands that, have reached that iconic status, it's that you do have different ranges. So you've got your halo brand that is in smaller volume, and then you've got your brand with big volume. So I think that is how they actually get to do that. But that's exactly what we want to do with Boschendal, is actually be a global wine brand, where, our Chardonnay 1685 blend is, I think, almost 450,000 liters. That means that we can strive to be a Penfolds, where we can be in every single market. Whether you travel the world, you'll see a Boschendal Chardonnay in a Tesco, in a independent store. So, but yes, it is true. If you just look at the UK, the moment you're in Tesco, the independents, they don't want to list you. So it's that whole play of it. But yes, when you do have different ranges, for example, we've got our 1685 range, then we've got our appellation series. There we go after site-specific, terroir-driven wines. we speak to two different consumers. It's different price points, different consumer. There's and I think that's maybe how you get to do that.
You've also got the advantage, and you'll appreciate this more than most, of some exceptional winemakers at Boschendal.
We do, and they work together as a team amazingly well. So, and each of them are specialized in what they do. I mean, Danielle is amazing at the Cap Classique. She's got a real finesse to it, and then you got Charles that has joined us now. He's busy. He's in the thick of Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay right now. Very excited to see the wines that's going to be produced this year. And Jacques, I mean, he's amazing with his team. So as cellar master as well, his red wines, we've really spent a lot of time and effort in the Helderberg. It's his love, and him and Heine, our viticulturists, I think they really understand the Helderberg now, and the quality is just improving year on year. So very excited going forward about where we're going.
It's a cracking team, and I've done a fair bit with them, and they're just so passionate about what they make, and I think it shows through. You really can say that, and we'll start off with one that does exactly that. I'm drinking this for a number of reasons. We are celebrating the life of Dave Hughes. I'm celebrating my first round of golf in 10.5 months and limping off the course just about in one piece, but also celebrating a part of the South African wine space that I think is just growing and growing and growing at the moment, possibly linked to the global stress on the champagne stocks from the big houses. It gives a wonderful opportunity for South Africa to step in and say, hey, our Cap Classique can do a pretty good job. And if you look at this particular style, this is very much one of those wines.
Definitely. So we're drinking the Grand Cuvée. This is 100% from Elgin. So this is cool climate. It's very much the same style of champagne. If you look at the cool climate, it's quite austere. It's not big and fruity. So it can definitely compete with the champagne and the likes. We often do benchmark tastings with champagne, with cava, with prosecco, and it's amazing how South African Cap Classiques just come out on top. And the Cap Classique Association is doing an amazing job to raise the category. Because, for example, in the UK as well, a lot of the consumers don't even know about Cap Classique as a category. A lot of independents, Cap Classique is actually put into the other section. So getting it into the sparkling section. But there's so much potential going forward. I'm very excited about growing this category. And I think in the US, there's also so much potential. People tasting Cap Classique, everyone that tastes love it. I mean, we over-deliver on quality compared to the quality that you would get, in some of the other countries.
Champagne is a term that everybody knows immediately and understands, and quite often South Africans will use the term even though they're drinking Cap Classique. It is so entrenched. But there are other terms. You mentioned Prosecco, for instance. Prosecco, everybody knows what Prosecco is. You're a brand in 70 different countries. How much progress are we making so that the wine drinker in the street, if you say Cap Classique in New York or in London or in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, how many are likely to go, oh yes, those are South African bubbles?
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, to be honest. And luckily the likes of the Cap Classique Association, the likes of WOSA, that's things they're also concentrating on. But slowly but surely, I mean, it's about education, educating the consumer, having trade shows, having consumer shows. It's still a lot of homework to be done, but I think there's great PR that's coming out, and I think 10 years time, we will be where we want to be.
All right. It is looking very promising. It's fairly far down the road, I think, in terms of getting up and running. A type of wine that is maybe not quite so far down, but I think has got almost as much potential to get there, is what our friends in Constantia are claiming very happily to be the Constantia White. And I think with justification, because they do it really well. But there are other parts of the country that also did extremely well, as you do. This is the Suzanne, the Bordeaux White blend. And that's the Semillon and the Sauvignon Blanc. Before we talk about that, who will be Suzanne?
Suzanne. So let's start with Nicholas. Nicholas was one of the founders of Boschendal. So
Nicholas Delanoy.
So it was Jean Delong and Nicholas Delanoy were basically the founders of Boschendal, and his wife was called Suzanne. So it's almost like a his and hers couple that we're honoring, because we're pretty proud of our history of being able to make wine for 337 years. Is quite something to be proud of in South Africa.
Well, you've lent her name to a wine that you clearly feel is quite special, or you wouldn't have done exactly that. And it's one I think I'm seeing a bit more of in South Africa, where the thirst for Sauvignon Blanc is certainly there, but our ability to make extremely good Semillon is now being appreciated more and more, as is the ability to put these two grapes together and come up with something that's fairly simple. It's just two grapes going together, but the results can be magnificent.
Absolutely. For me, that Semillon just adds that mid-palate weight. It's that creamy texture. Yeah, it's just amazing. I think it's 100% Algan. The area is just incredible. There are not a lot of crazy people. We actually took out the apples and planted vineyards there because we've seen...
this is not the way things normally go at the moment.
It's much more profitable to have apples. But the grapes we're getting from the Algan region is just... Oh, sorry. It's just incredible. So I'm very excited about this, I think. And what we've seen this Zan is that it ages beautifully. So even though it's drinkable young, in 5 years' time, this wine is just absolutely spectacular.
How is it changing over 5 years?
The minerality, I know it's very, but the minerality, the acid naturally in this wine is just, I mean, it's textbook wine. It's a pH of 3.1. It's got an acid of 7.5. This wine is just, it's got legs to last forever. So the fruit profile, it's just, it's more old world, I would say. It reminds me of old world Bordeaux. It's just so elegant, and I think that's with the name as well. It's just perfect for Suzanne.
I'll just make a quick diary entry in my phone there to have a glass of wine with you in 2028 and see if it is good, as you assure me it will be.
It's a deal.
I suspect it will. All right, so that's one. If you haven't tried it yet, the Suzanne and that Semillon Sauvignon space, which Constantia's doing a lot of, but Elgin doing really well as well. And I think it's Elgin, which would be in the next one we're going to have a taste of. I think, is that the Chardonnay from Elgin?
Yes. So I bought the Elgin Chardonnay as well. This wine has won awards every single year internationally. So I think that's why we're so excited about the Elgin region. Elgin and Helderberg is probably two of the areas we constrain a lot of. Sauvignon Blanc, more to the Durbanville area. But yes, the Elgin Chardonnay, it's so elegant. It's also more old world style. We're picking earlier. We don't have to do any acid additions to the wine. It's just, like I say, winemaking is actually quite simple when it's made in the vineyard. So, and if you see those vineyards, it's you need a GPS to get to these vineyards. It's high up, and you almost get lost. But once you're up there and you actually look down at the valley, you understand. Oh my goodness! Okay, this is terroir. This is why this wine is so unique. I think the longer hanging period, the complexity you have in the grapes is just, it's amazing.
I mentioned earlier on the show that there is the upcoming Wine State of the Nation at Culture with David Clark from Exanima and with Christian Eads, and that he would probably be mentioning some of the things that he did on our show at the start of the year, and something he did reference and that Melu Lambert referenced as well. They'd both been to the Chardonnay Colloquium, and they were both so excited about where Chardonnay was going in 2023. Challenge often in South Africa, we do so much so well that it's hard to decide where we're going to nail our colours for the mast in particular. But there does seem to be, after some shaky years not that long ago, and we're a bit too obsessed with wood and making big knockout style wines, that we really are entering a very, very cool space for Chardonnay.
I completely agree. I think people aren't picking that ripe anymore. People are, picking at the right stage. They are not using too much oak. They've just the more restrained styles, more in line with Burgundy is just. I think people have realized that's where we should be, and finding those cooler sites. So no, I think Chardonnay is doing amazingly well, and I'm glad we've changed from that style, the overly alcoholic, overly wooded, anything but Chardonnay. Phase that we went through at one stage.
It was difficult persuading those ABC types to give it a crack.
Yeah, definitely.
But we've made progress, and wines like yours certainly help in that Chardonnay space. All right, we've had some bubbles, we've had some white. How about a couple of the reds? What have you brought along today?
So I brought along our Nicholas. So as I said, Nicholas Delanoy was one of the founders. And Nicholas is a red blend. It is basically a Bordeaux blend with a little bit of Shiraz, everything from the Helderberg. We found that little bit of Shiraz just adds mid-palate, and it makes the wine accessible early on. Mm-hmm. It's we call it our James Bond wine. men want to be like it and women want it. So, but we're finding people, it's just so easy drinking. If you try a bottle of Nicholas, people are just fall in love with it. So,
and it has been a huge success for you. It's very much premium wine, but in terms of premium wine pricing, it's pretty accessible. And you just have, and I think that Shiraz is a stroke of genius, and it's almost a third in there. It's a reasonable amount, but it's taken the standard Bordeaux blend and just put that new spin on it. That it often people are just trying to place something and they're not entirely sure what it is, but they know that they like it.
Exactly. So, and that's the Helderberg Shiraz. It's almost that secret spice that is in there. Jacques is like, it's just that whole that was there. That's the secret spice that we use. And yeah, we've had amazing success. It's been growing 300% in the past year. So people clearly like it, and it's once they've tried, it's just okay. That's what they keep on buying. So we're very fortunate, and I've tasted some of the coming vintages and out of the barrels, and the quality is just going to keep on being at that level. And I mean, we've secured a lot of vineyards in the Helderberg. We've got a long-term strategy to make sure that with our ambitious targets where we're going with Nicholas, that's because we want that to be on the global scale, like a Penfolds going forward, that we will have the quality at that volumes going forward. So
in terms of the success, I think not dissimilar to the Chardonnay, where it's the change in style that's had such a big impact, and this is speaking more collectively as opposed to just Boschendal. I'm seeing more and more, even the red blends, where traditionally it was big and heavy and 14.5%, 15% alcohol. I think people are appreciating wine that's not light and watery, but there's definitely a more focus on the elegance and the purity of fruit, and something that's not necessarily quite so in your face as a wine.
Exactly. And we've got a consultant that helped Jacques with the wine, and I think stylistically did change from being that overly extracted, big, bold wine to being more elegant. And it's just, instead of having just one glass, you can actually have a whole bottle. Kind of, you're not, you don't get saturated by the wine as much, where that's that big, bold wines. Yes, there's a place and a time for every wine. I think it just as an everyday wine, this is just absolutely amazing. It delivers, it's a good food wine. Really enjoyable.
But if you want some very in-depth analysis on this particular wine, there is a rather large former Springbok rugby player, I won't mention his name, who had some of the Nicholas last night, and he said the wine was lekker. So there's one for your marketing next time you're on the road.
Thank you. I'm going to use that one.
All right. There are so many wines you could show us. You bought one last one.
My last one I brought is our Stellenbosch Cabernet.
Now, this one is particularly close to me because I hosted the launch of that down
Before my time.
before your time. Yeah, things weren't running so well. No, we did launch. It was a wonderful launch. We got to speak to a whole lot of people. And initially, there were a few eyebrows raised. Hold on, Boschendal's not in Stellenbosch. Why are you doing a Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon? But the way that so much wine is working, it's really a focus of where are we going to get the best stuff to make the best wine. And it's a very simple philosophy. And you've already mentioned this love affair with the Helderberg that Jacques has. And you went out with a very, very clear plan here. We are going to make a great Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, and we're going to find the grapes to do exactly that.
Exactly. That's Jacques always said that would be, his dream is to make Helderberg Cabernet, and he's lucky enough to got given that granted. And Stellenbosch Cab is absolutely, it's so special. But if you actually go up to the spot, it's just incredible. You look over False Bay, that cooling breeze coming. It's not just something we write in marketing. It's to actually experience it. To be in those vineyards is just spectacular. So some of the farms, I was there the other day, and to actually see it, you kind of understand this is what I'm tasting. But I mean, Stellenbosch and Cabernet has always been, it's one of the iconic South African wines. And we believe in Boschendal, even though our farm is not in Stellenbosch, we are finding this best spots for each cultivar, and we're trying to make the best wine we possibly can.
And good for you for doing that, because I think there was a time when there were a lot of people, and for the very best reasons, were trying to make everything they possibly could from where they were. And I think we're understanding more and more, let's see where we're not just good at stuff, where we're really good at stuff, and we're only going to win from that.
Exactly. So I think as South Africans, we still, we were finding our feet, seeing which areas are best. I mean, that's what France and Bordeaux and Burgundy and all the other areas have already done for centuries. So, but I think slowly but surely we're finding our feet, knowing which areas, the best cultivars are grown and produce the best wines.
If you are watching this as one of the guests at the Dimension Data Prime, you'll have a chance to drink all of these wines during the week because they are all on show and being enjoyed very visibly by the guests. If not, then of course they're available all over South Africa and in 70 countries in the world. So wherever you are, there is a good chance you will find them. Will you, though, that's my final question for this evening, be able to find another wine made by you? Is that something that might happen? Is there an itch still to be scratched? Do you think there's another vintage or two somewhere on the horizon?
Definitely someday. Someday. Yeah. Look, I'm not gonna. I can always make wine again. So yeah. Sometimes people ask me, do I miss it? And yes, you're quite proud making something and sharing that with people. That for me was amazing. So yes, I think definitely one day, when the time is right, I will make something again. Whether it's in my garage or not, we'll have to see. But,
maybe something to pair with the Semillon Sauvignon Blanc Suzanne in 5 years' time when we have our glass of wine.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Magic. Lovely catching up with you, Nina. Thank you for sharing the story and some terrific wine, and for being part of this week of the Dimension Data Prime. You've made many people very, very happy indeed.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
So there we go. Coming to you from Fancourt this week, this Thursday, it is Dan Really Likes Wine. Thank you very much to Fiona McDonald joining us earlier to celebrate the life of Dave Hughes. And thank you to Nina Marie, winemaker extraordinaire and now running the marketing sales down at Boschendal. And most importantly, allowing us to avoid having to have Andrew Harris on the show today. So great improvement. I am off to host this evening's function, play some more golf, and I'll see you back on the show on Monday when we will be joined, heaven help me, by Wendy Applebaum will be joining us from De Morganson. I shall ask her one question and then go and play golf as she finishes. We'll also be joined by Raymond and Lovell, by Ken Quincy Quick, by Ian Banner, and by Paul Kluver. They are together the committee of the Cape Wine Auction that I'll be hosting next Saturday, and we'll throw forward to that. And next Thursday, look out for a really cool show. Saki Mouton and Lucas van Lochenberg and John Loubser will be on the show, amongst others, as we look at Colombard. No D, remember, it's South Africa, and a grape that's also on the up from very humble origins. That does it for today. Thanks again, Nina. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a glass for Dave, and if you can, make it a glass of Boschendal. Cheers.